Well, let me just get back to the police issue itself, because I found this, and this goes along with, I have to try to keep telling people this isn't a bad apple. They keep saying, well, most cops are good, and I know cops, and the cops I know are nice to me, and that's what I have to keep. Of course, you know them. They're nice to you. And again, you can generalize about cops because it's a culture. And cops either succumb to the culture or they leave, meaning they succumb to the criminal culture and the over-policing and the brutal, violent mentality of America's policing culture, or they leave the profession. There aren't any two ways. And so I have videos I'm going to show later in the day that shows a cop beating up someone. Well, this instance in this, that all started this, one cop was killing him and three other cops stood around and protected the cop killing him from any of the citizens stopping the cop from killing him. So they all participated. And that's what happens all the time. If a cop isn't one committing the crime, he's covering for the one who is committing the crime, which is a crime. And if you've ever seen the movie Serpico, go watch it, because that's what policing is really like. And in fact, Serpico wrote an article just a few years ago in Politico. It says it's worse now than when he was a cop. So go watch that movie. Completely corrupt. Cops are criminals. All right. So when someone comes in and tries to reform them, so the way you reform the police departments, right now, police departments dictate to the city how they're going to police them. That's not how it should work. The community should dictate to the police how they police, like what crimes they should emphasize their enforcement of, how they should enforce certain crimes, if they should enforce certain crimes at all. For instance, like curfew. Should you arrest a kid for curfew, or do you want them to take cops to take the kid home? Or that's something that the cops shouldn't get to decide. That's something the community decides. So that just on a small scale like that. But cops resist this, and cops have unions, and cops donate to politicians, so that's how they control the city, right? And so then the mayor comes in, and he tries to say, we're going to stop this. Well, here's the Minnesota Star Tribune. Minneapolis Police Union offers free warrior training in defiance of the mayor's ban. And what I've tried to also tell people is that cops are trained to be this way. They're trained to dehumanize the other person, and they're also trained to escalate. They're never ever trained to de-escalate. If they say they are, that's a lie. That's not true. And lots of these people are trained in the battlefield, right? The battlefield in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they're taught to treat the other as the enemy. If they come back here, they treat you as the enemy and not a citizen to be served. And here they are dictating to the mayor of Minneapolis how they're going to train their police and how they're going to police their city. That's the cop. An unelected cop telling the mayor. So if you, underneath the picture, it says Minneapolis Police Union President, Lieutenant Bob Kroll, said that he consulted with the police union's attorney, who said Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey's directive was unlawful. So he's going to tell the mayor how to police, and the mayor, who's elected, doesn't get to tell the cop. And here, I'll just give you a little bit more of the story. In open defiance of Minneapolis's Mayor Jacob Frey, the union that represents the city's roughly 900 rank-and-file police officers announced that it is partnering with the National Rifle Organization to offer free warrior-style training for any officer who wants it. Wow, is that expensive? Well, free online training valued at $55,000 a year is offered to officers as long as Frey remains the mayor. So you see what's happening? Now the cops are an occupying force in a city because the elected official has no power over them, and they're defying him, and we're going to do whatever the fuck we want to your citizens. That's what the cops are saying. The criminal cops are saying that. They're defying the people they're supposed to be serving. The training, which covers a range of issues from officer survival and leadership to fitness and de-escalation, double CK, was designed to ensure that officers could return home each day to their family, regardless of the dangers that they may face and the ignorance of some politicians, the press release said. That's the press release from the frickin' cops. The cops said the number one job, right there, that each cop returns home each day to their family. That is not a cop's job. Cop's job is to make sure I come home safe to my family. He's supposed to risk his life. He's supposed to put himself in between a bullet and me. That's what a cop's supposed to do. But cops don't do that anymore because cops are cowards and bullies and violent maniacs, and half of them are on steroids and the other half just came back from Iraq, and they like to fuck shit up. And that's why they're doing this. And that's why their whole mentality is, I'm going to kill you. That's why the cops are the guys with the itchiest trigger fingers in the city. In the city. They're shooting people that no one else would shoot. The cops are, because they're trained that way with their warrior training. Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, said at the time that Minneapolis would become the first department in the country to eliminate fear-based training, which is what cops have now, to always look at everyone as a potential murderer of them and to have the itchiest trigger finger in the country. And that's what they have. That's why we murder people with impunity from coast to coast, right out in broad daylight, and cops don't worry about it. That doesn't happen in other countries. We killed more people in January than England has killed in their entire history. Okay, in this country. So that's what. So what do you say to that, Chris, when you see something like that? That's the part that people are missing. It's not that individual cops are good or bad. It's that the cop culture in America is criminal, and that it treats the citizen as the enemy. Because I'll tell you what's happening in Minneapolis is the same thing that's happening in Los Angeles. The cops don't live in the neighborhoods they patrol. So all the cops that patrol in black neighborhoods in Los Angeles live out in the whitest white canyon country, way out in the suburbs, nowhere near Los Angeles. And then they drive in and police it. They're an occupying force, and they see every person in that neighborhood as their enemy. So I'll just throw it over to you, Chris. You know much more about this. What do you say?
Well, first of all, let's go back, to the whole kind of broken windows policy and stop and frisk. It all became about statistics. So it was about, especially, grabbing people for drugs, statistically not doing any real investigations. And then you saw with all the tax cuts, this is true in St. Louis County, where there was shortfalls in the budgets. So 30% had to be made up through fines.
Yes.
So they make up crimes. That's how Eric Garner gets murdered for supposedly selling loose cigarettes. Like that should be a crime, even though on that day he wasn't even selling loose cigarettes. Or this guy in Minneapolis who supposedly had a $20 counterfeit bill or something. I mean, my favorite is obstructing pedestrian traffic, which means standing on a sidewalk. So, mowing your lawn, not mowing your lawn, open container, it's just endless. And so it's daily harassment as a way to extract money from people who have the least amount of money in the country. And then real crimes, the cops in those neighborhoods don't have any incentive to investigate real crimes that affect the lives of the people who live there because it statistically boosts the crime rate. So they don't do it. So on the one hand, it's a kind of constant harassment of the poor. And that community at the same time understands that real criminal behavior in that community, right, the cops will turn their back on. And you talk about the culture. I don't want to say the city or talk a lot about it because I don't want to get them in trouble. But I wrote several years ago an investigative piece on a corrupt white cabal within a major city in New Jersey for the New York Times. They packed the station wagon trunks of the cruiser trunks filled with drugs. They had a 98% arrest because they were placing the drugs, on the people they were arresting, destroying hundreds of lives of people who, never got. And so I had an honest, a good cop essentially become my source. And he told me that when they did, he said, if they find out, they'll kill me. He said, when we do a raid, I'm always the last one in line because I don't know if they know. And if they do know and I'm up front, I'm going to get shot through the back. So yeah, it's a culture. It's very much like a military culture. And it is a hyper-masculine culture. And it is a culture that glorifies violence. And it is a culture that essentially not only protects their own, but protects the psychopaths. So, and I go to war. I mean, in every combat unit that I was in, there was always, a couple, maybe 1-2% of the unit were truly psychopaths, people who enjoyed killing, who would go through a mud-walled village, with a belt-fed saw and just unleash on the houses. And everybody in the unit knew they were nuts and kind of scared of them, but nobody would ever report them. And that's the problem. So once you get within that culture, and this guy, I forget his name, the cop who killed the 44-year-old cop. Anyway, what do you have? 18 counts again. I mean, these people have a long history, and all the cops around them know it.
He had a dozen. He had a dozen complaints against him.
A dozen complaints, but within that culture, as in the military, those people are given a completely free rein. Nobody ever steps in, and that's the sickness of the culture.
Yeah, and so. When I try to tell people, when I was at the Young Turks, they would always cover police brutality stories as if they were one-offs, and I didn't have the language yet to describe to them what was actually happening, but I knew inherently what was happening because I knew cops, and they all grew up in cul-de-sacs, and none of them really knew cops, and they still thought cops, joined for the right reasons, and they didn't understand the process, and they didn't understand that most cops are criminals or a half turn of the screw away from being one themselves. And that's why we need to keep, and I'm not saying we don't need cops. I'm saying we need to totally rethink the way cops, police people. I don't even know if cops should have guns in their, on their hips. They should maybe have a gun in their car that they have to go get, maybe a long rifle. It's just nuts that they're as armed as they are. And anyway, there's lots of different things that should happen. And I try to tell people, look at what happened at Stop and Frisk in New York for years. What kind of a person does that? What kind of a person does stop and frisk every day of their life, 9 to 5 every day, goes and messes with people's life for no reason whatsoever? Those are guys who get off on it. And if they don't, they blow the whistle and then they get kicked out of the force. That's how this works. Again, if you don't succumb to the culture, they get rid of you. Just like your informant knew that if they found out, they were going to not only get rid of him, they'd probably kill him. So what they did to Serpico is they shot him in the face. And so that guy knew that's what's coming. So I just try to disabuse people of the idea that cops are moral or that they're good people or that they're in it for the right reasons. It at 99.9% of the time is not the case. They're in it for the wrong reasons. They've succumbed to the culture. They're violent maniacs. They're on steroids. They get off on it, or they don't have the courage to speak up and they're going to let it happen right in front of them. They're going to let felonies happen right in front of them and not do anything, which makes them a criminal themselves. Okay, I just wanted to get that off my chest. All right. Okay. Hey, this is the part where I tell you where our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then I would tell you to go join our premium, but nobody has a fucking job. So why don't you just enjoy the video?